Good morning, I'm fine.
So what do you think? Is now the right time to be talking about third shots or boosters, however you want to look at it?
I think it's always a good time to talk about it. Whether or not it's a good time to actually start is another story entirely. In Canada, we're actually in a better position than the US is for a number of reasons. Number one is that we started our vaccination campaign a little later. And number two is through the good graces of NACI, who have been guiding us fairly well throughout this ordeal, we have a larger interdose interval. So the famously expanded time between the first and second dose that got a lot of people upset might actually be the thing that extends our immunity durability more so than the Americans and the Israelis are experiencing. So we have a lot more time to think about this. The other thing to consider as well is um, while protection against infection might be declining in the USA and Israel, protection against hospitalization is not appreciably. So what do we really care about here? We care about keeping people out of the hospital and out of the morgue, and the vaccines still do that very well. When those numbers start to be appreciably affected amongst the vaccinated, then I think is the time to really be vigorously looking at third boosters for the general population.
Is there any concrete information? And look, I know this has been the goalposts have been moving. We're learning each and every day, each and every week. So perspectives change and ideas change and the knowledge changes as we learn more. But is there any indication at this point about the length of time until sort of the antibodies start to wane, start to drop off? When is the point where the vaccination is not as effective as it may have been initially?
There's so many unknowns there. As I mentioned, it depends on the interdose interval. It depends on who you are. It may react differently amongst the elderly versus the younger, amongst the immunocompromised. And the data that we do have, it's based on what's observed in the population. So the rate of infection amongst the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated over a period of time. And that's going to depend on where you live, which variants are circulating, what kind of mitigation tools were in effect in the cities in which you lived as well. So many variables at play. The quick answer, though, is you don't know really until that time has elapsed. We don't know if it lasts for 2 years until 2 years have elapsed. We've got some modeling that suggests that maybe after a few months the effectiveness can diminish by a certain percent. But the best we can do is look at what people are actually experiencing in real time around the world. And it looks like, at the very least, durable immunity, is lasting at least 8 months. And reduction in hospitalization rates is quite substantial. So I don't think this will be an issue for at least another 6 months or so in Canada, and I would say beyond that.
There is the Delta variant. Does that enter into it? And as I mentioned, Ontario is considering looking at getting these sort of third shot, booster shots for particularly vulnerable individuals. Is that Delta driven, or is that just overall they think it's a good idea?
I think it's an overall thing because the vaccines work well against Delta. It's just, how are they still durable against COVID in general? What Delta does is creates a more dire scenario because more people can be infected in general, and the vaccine efficacy drops a little bit in the face of Delta. That's not what we're talking about here. Another thing to keep in mind is when we're looking at the effectiveness of vaccines, we're looking mostly at the antibody response. But there's another arm of the immune system, the cellular arm, B cells and T cells and things like that, that lasts much longer. So it's possible, let's say you don't get a booster, it's possible that years down the end, your body can still remember what it was like to see COVID and still offer some protection. So this is not an all or nothing deal.
Interesting. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist specializing in global health on the University of Ottawa, talking with us this morning. We've heard some people saying the last thing we need to do is worry about these third shots because because of what you've already said to us this morning. We need to be more focused on making sure that first and second shots get out there, not just here in Canada, but also elsewhere around the world. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
I think it's a perfect way of looking at it. This is a global pandemic, a global emergency, and the reason we are still dealing with COVID and dealing with new variants all the time is because it is percolating with intensity in pockets around the world that do not have access to vaccines. So until we get access to vaccines for those most vulnerable, this crisis continues to boil over. WHO suggested that we should wait until all the world has at least 10% vaccination before we even think about third doses. And Mike Ryan of the WHO had a great quote. He said, "Why are we throwing life jackets to people who already have life jackets when there are people in the water with no life jackets?" That is the right way of thinking about this, especially since here in the wealthier countries, we have other tools to keep transmission down while we wait for that third booster decision. We have masking, we have distancing, all these other tools.
Here in Alberta, we are almost at 70% of people fully vaccinated, getting very close to that, and much higher, obviously, with everybody with these crystals. Did you say we're trying to get to 10% worldwide vaccination?
Yeah, the WHO recommends that every country should have at least 10% before anyone considers a third shot. That's just an equity kind of approach. There are many countries that are still in single digits vaccination. That's how bad the rollout is globally.
10%. Well, I guess when you consider you're talking 7, 8, almost 8 billion people.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 10%. That's a sobering number. And I have to wonder, does that do anything? I know it's been causing. Well, we have to get to 50%. We have to get to 60%. We have to get to 10% sounds to me, from a layman's point of view, like that's almost irrelevant.
Yeah, I can see why one might think that. And definitely it's true to even have the herd immunity conversation. If that's still in the books, we'd have to be at 85, 90% probably at this point. But 10% at least takes significant strain off of your healthcare system, especially if you're a poor country with poor healthcare. So every little bit helps. Frankly, we should be aiming for 85% for the entire world. We have the resources. What we lack is the political will and the focus.
You know what? I'll put myself out there. I got AstraZeneca. Basically, I got an AstraZeneca right off the bat. Then those supplies dried up for any number of reasons. I got a Pfizer shot as a second. From a purely selfish first world point of view, I want to be able to travel. And I know that internationally, that some people are not, some countries are not recognizing AstraZeneca. I kind of want to go and get a third shot of Pfizer. It has nothing to do with health. I just want to travel. People like me, does that frustrate you?
No, it doesn't frustrate me because, frankly, you're not a large number of people. The number of people with mixed doses who want to travel is tiny compared to the rest of the world. So if we give a third dose to you, that doesn't really affect the supply that much. So I have no problem with that.
Dad, do I have any problems? Since I've got you handy, and I know other people have talked about this, the mixing and matching of vaccines. Do you have any issues with that? I guess because we were told right from the vet that the first shot you can get is the best shot you should get, and then I would assume afterwards it's whatever is available.
Mixing and matching is fantastic. We call that a heterogeneous prime boost, and we've seen it work better in other vaccines, like hepatitis vaccines. There's every reason to expect the mix and match to have a more robust immune response than keeping it same. So if a third booster is rolled out, I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't matter which formulation you get. It might even be one of the new ones by Novavax or Medicago that are coming down the pipeline. It's a brand new era in vaccinology. A whole bunch of new products are coming down, and I think we will be accessing a suite of new vaccines, many of which are made in Canada.
And tweaked maybe for the new variant.
Entirely possible. I hope that's the case. That's the way we do it with the flu vaccine. We modify it every year to account for the circulating strains. And we call these multivalent vaccines because they are targeting several beasts at the same shot. And I anticipate that will be the case once we get this in order.
Outstanding. Interesting stuff. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Doctor.
My pleasure.